What's the difference between augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality? It is a range of experiences. On one hand, we have virtual reality, which is a total immersive experience where you put on a headset and you are disconnected from your environment. Everything you see and interact is a 3D generated object. And on the other hand, for augmented reality, you have a connection to your environment, like in HoloLens, and you have some extra information, maybe 3D or maybe audio information that's available to you, which is augmenting your reality. Also, we have mobile phone applications like Pokemon Go. You are looking through the glass of your phone and you're able to find 3D objects in the real world. And this whole range of experiences we call mixed reality. And short, it's called XR.
So, welcome everyone. I'm happy to be here with Pete Dunn from Flint Tech, and he's going to talk about defining the map to the metaverse. And Pete, take it away. I'll give the stage to you, and I'll be back for the Q&A, and happy to hear what you will show us.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. Thank you. What an honor it is to be here at such a great conference. Now, of course, there's a lot of talk right now about the metaverse, what it is, what it isn't, and what it could be. And we're not going to get into the weeds of that, because each and every individual, let's say, definition of what the metaverse is varies between companies, people, locations. What I want to focus on today is actually defining that map to the metaverse, no matter what your definition of that is. Now, for that to happen, there's a couple of things that I think almost every company out there is missing, from big tech companies like Meta through to individuals. Everyone seemingly missing one of the most important and critical parts of what the metaverse is. But before we get into that, I'll kind of start with a little story. So when I was a kid growing up, I was a bit strange, and some people may still think that statement is true to this day, but I was very individualistic. I didn't really get involved in team sports. I didn't really socialize very well. I was always focused on individual sports like boxing, martial arts, and golf, as well as my circle of friends, very small, very kind of a niche circle of friends. The reason I bring that up is one of the things that the metaverse will do is level the playing field and make people, I think, feel more comfortable interacting and engaging. But specifically, there's one component of that, and that's what everyone, as I mentioned, is missing, is the people. Now, of course, there's a lot of talk about technology and the deep tech, let's say, that maybe makes up the metaverse, but also as well the components of that, whether that is virtual reality, augmented reality, gaming, crypto, NFTs, DAOs, all of the good acronyms. But without people, without mass adoption, the metaverse can't exist. It won't exist. And one of my big concerns as we, as a company, as Flint, start to build and play in the metaverse is exactly that. How do we get people to adopt the various technologies? What needs to happen for people, your everyday people that maybe aren't necessarily tech savvy, to adopt? And that's why, as a thought exercise, I wanted to define the map to the metaverse and what that looks like. So to give an analogy, I'm an avid gamer, and again, it's solo kind of games, whether that's Red Dead, so on and so forth. But I grew up in those kind of first-person game styles, and still to this day. But if you've ever played any sort of game, and I'll use Red Dead Redemption as a great example, if you've ever played that type of game, you know, as you navigate through the land, through the experience, through the journey of the game and through the story, at any time you can go in and look at the map and see where you are and where you're going. Now, in terms of the metaverse, that's really difficult to do because, again, to be completely transparent, I don't think anybody really knows where that could go. And there's a lot of things that need to happen. But as a thought experiment, consider this. Imagine you were in this virtual world. What needs to happen for you to actually be involved in it, for you to interact, whether that's your day job, whether that's engaging with friends and family, or buying something online? What does it take for you to adopt that technology? There's a simple test I'll always run whenever anybody talks me through any sort of technology. Can my mum use it? And if she's watching, hi mum, of course. But in terms of technology, that's the parameter. It's everyday people that don't have access to a virtual reality headset, that maybe don't have access to a smartphone or strong enough Wi-Fi connection to get that experience up and running. And of course, it's not just XR that form the metaverse, it's the whole components that I mentioned before, but so much more. So what does that look like? If we imagine that we're starting here and this is the metaverse, what products can bridge that gap? And what does that look like in a defined sense? Of course, there's augmented reality, which arguably is has, I should say, the least barrier to entry. A lot of people do have a smartphone or access to a smartphone, so it's the lowest form of access to that. But I don't think that's right. I think when we look at AR as it stands currently, there's a lot of functionalities that need to be added, and also a lot of things that can't be done using augmented reality. So for me, when it comes to AR, and I love augmented reality, I've been in the industry for many, many years, but when it comes to AR, specifically for the metaverse, I think mixed reality is going to be the real emphasis and thrusting point of that. But then coming back to that map, okay, so we know that the metaverse is happening, it's a real thing. But how can we get that mass adoption? And for me, there's some critical questions that need to be asked and certainly need to be answered by the people, the average consumer, people that are actively going to use this technology, and specifically, not just use it, but gain value from it. So for every tech company out there, for every company that is building or playing in the metaverse, the big question that should be on your lips is, how do we solve that digital divide? And then from there, what is that map? So a little experiment I want everyone watching to try and run, specifically if you've got a virtual reality headset. I've got a good old-fashioned cup of tea here. My VR headset's just out of reach. But if you've got access to a VR headset, I implore you, please, to go and make a drink, tea, coffee, but something in a mug or glass, and then try and drink it with your virtual reality headset on. It's not so easy. There's a lot of thoughts that needs to happen in shrinking down the hardware and getting that into the hands of consumers. Then and only then can we really start to build that bridge and put in products, services, applications within that defining moment. So the big question is, how do we bridge that digital divide? Now, of course, there's too many factors and time doesn't permit for everything to go in there, but there's a couple of additional questions that I really want everybody to start thinking about. So once we've figured out what bridges that digital divide, then we need to ask ourselves, from a people-centric and from an end-user-centric position, what do they need? What do they actually want? And what are they actually going to use in there? From there, then we can figure out that compass. So this is the big issue. A lot of companies are talking about the technology and the various components, but what do the people need? What have they got access to? Or what's what's the best entry point or the tip of the spear? Now, in my opinion, and certainly from what I'm seeing in the marketplace, there's two components that will guide us through that map. One is games. The second is VR. Now, VR, of course, and again, is something I've been involved with for a long, long time. VR in its current form does have limitations specifically centered around the hardware. When costs come down and they become lighter, more accessible, that's a good start. But if we use those two components as our guiding compass from games through to virtual reality, whether that's for training, education, entertainment, whatever use case that may be, they're, at least in my opinion and many others, two of the core components that are going to make up that map within the metaverse. Because it doesn't, as I said, the metaverse as a concept doesn't work. And there's a lot of people who are in the XR space talking about it, but this doesn't happen often, because when you start to think about the people, that paradigm starts to shift. As Edwin Markham once said, choices are the hinges of destiny. So let's begin there and open that door. Now, for me, one of the core components that needs to happen with the metaverse is Web3. Now, of course, and again, I apologize to Mark Zuckerberg and the whole Meta and Facebook crew. There's a lot of components that have been talked about in the metaverse previously, decades ago, plus as well Web3. It's not a new concept, but let's start there. With Web3, that was going to lead on to the metaverse. Now, where do we go from there? Again, if we bring back that map and there's the destination, there's a lot of different areas, a lot of, let's say, different towns that need to be visited. One, of course, is the hardware itself. That is a very critical thing for the cost to come down. But for me, without that whole concept of Web3, there is no metaverse. So again, just to kind of fill in the blanks of that map, it's good to understand, let's say, the different iterations of the web. So when we started, I'm almost 40, so I kind of remember that initial web circa the sort of 1990s. That was a read-only web, so it was just magazines online, essentially. Next up was Web 2.0, which was sort of early 2000s, and what we're in now. So it's that sort of social interaction-based web. And now with Web3, and there's a lot of companies already working on this, and there's a lot of metaverse games or products or items hidden in plain sight. But Web3 needs to be open and community-based. And that's exactly what the metaverse ought to be. When we define that map, and there is no right answer here, but when we define that map, everything needs to be open. So coming back to the game map analogy. So let's imagine I was playing Red Dead Redemption. And I'm scrolling through the map and I've gone to Saint Denis and I've gone to the other locations. But what if I wanted to switch game? What if I wanted to switch to Roblox? Or what if I wanted to play Grand Theft Auto? Or what if I wanted to play any other type of game? Now, currently, I have to literally turn that game off and go into the other one. So I'm no longer in that map. The true, for me at least, definition of the metaverse should be that I can continue scrolling through and I can go from that map to the next one. That openness needs to be there as part of the metaverse. It needs to be open source. It should be blockchain built, token-based economy. That's where we're at. And on tokens, that's of course another key component of the metaverse. NFTs, of course, a hot item right now. And as a collector myself, is something, of course, I'm very much interested in. So we need to factor in all of these components when it comes to what the actual metaverse could be. Because currently, and this is a great analogy that I heard the other day. This isn't mine, but I'm going to shamelessly steal it. If you're of a similar age to me, you may remember when the web and the internet was new. and it was fresh, and you could scroll through, and literally the term was coined, surfing the web. Now I can almost bet right now that everybody has a list of maybe 20 at max websites that they go in and use on a sort of semi-regular basis, and of course they vary. But if again you bring that map back, that is one combined ecosystem. There's no silos, there's no schedules, there's no different sections. It is that open component. And really without that, that's not the metaverse, or at least not in my definition of the metaverse. Again, as I mentioned, I'm a collector, and I'm also a big comic book and superhero nerd. And you may have heard the definition multiverse, which from a Marvel perspective is lots of different universes that make up the whole ecosystem. What we're building right now is a multiverse of metaverses, or almost everybody is building a multiverse of metaverses. These kind of walled gardens, these self-contained areas that only a select few have access to. Now, again, in my definition of the metaverse, as well as many others, it's having that open community. So I can shop, I can engage, I can game. So once we define that, and we are defining that right now, but once we define that, then what needs to happen? So as I mentioned, we've got augmented reality, we've got virtual reality, we've got the whole XR space. How do we drive mainstream adoption of these great technologies that I love and use every day, as I'm sure do the audience here watching? How do we drive mainstream adoption? As I gave the VR headset cup of tea analogy, please go and try it. Please don't spill any hot drinks on yourself. But to give that analogy, what else needs to happen? Costs needs to come down of hardware? Absolutely. But how does that play into our map? So again, we've got that start, we've got that end goal. The end goal, of course, being the metaverse. So let's look at the actual hardware itself. Let's look at the components within that. But let's look at the people. We don't want to go down the whole build it and they will come, field of dreams style technology development. That's just not going to happen. If you force people to be involved in the metaverse, that's not going to work. People are going to resist. People are going to go down the whole dystopian viewpoint that maybe they have. The other big thing I think we need to really focus on to define that map is actually getting out and building it. So we do need to solve that digital divide, and I don't have an answer for that. Many people don't have an answer for that. A lot of people said 5G will, really amplify and boost the whole augmented reality side of things. Potentially, yes. But there's an awful lot of people out there still that don't even have access to any sort of Wi-Fi, let alone a smartphone. So once we've solved that digital divide, we need to make the web better. And that can only happen with Web 3.0. That shift away from the current iteration of walled gardens needs to happen no matter what tech vertical. And I think everybody I'm a big believer in technology for good, and the metaverse can be a good thing for a lot of people, but it does need to be less monopolistic. It needs to be more open, as I said. It needs to be less combative and far more collaborative. And then it's less solo status driven and more community wealth building. And I'm not just talking about wealth from a financial perspective. I'm talking about richness, value, fulfillment within the metaverse. If we can incorporate those people-centric requirements into that, that's something that's really, really beneficial for all. And then the next point, as I mentioned, was to actually go out and build and play in the metaverse, whether that's the Web 2 iteration of Roblox as a game, or whether that's the more Web 3 based sandbox game, which is a great game, and obviously the play to earn shift. But those three things certainly need to happen. The other thing, what is the metaverse going to be? And again, I'm going to use an analogy that I saw the other day, which is web spaces, not websites. And that, I think, for me, so far has been the most succinct and defining definition of the metaverse. It is more than virtual reality. It is more than just this 3D combined space. How can we blend the physical with the virtual, with the digital, and bring them all together in harmony without taking away or detracting from anything else within the meat space or within the physical world? That's a question that we're working on hard at Flint right now, as to how we can bring those components together. So when it comes to defining that map, those are the questions that we're absolutely asking. There's a lot of various areas that need to be covered. And coming back to what I was saying about surfing the web, that doesn't happen anymore. There's no exploration. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. There's no exploration. Within the metaverse and within that map, you ought to be able to explore, whether that's through games, whether that is through VR, whether that's through AR or any of the other components. To solve that, we all need to come together and work together to drop all of those components in. As an example, here at Flint, our focus is on AR and VR. We also have other companies that are focusing on crypto, gaming, NFTs, and so on under our group. But we're merging those, and that openness and that amalgamation of everything can and will bring the metaverse forward. So ask yourself, what does need to happen to bridge that gap? Where are those products? Where are those things? Where are they placed? What are those? What are those products? And how can we get the metaverse to a stage where we can go and explore, where we can literally go and surf in the virtual world again? See, when I first started on the internet, let's say, I could go anywhere. It was very sort of free. We didn't really have that tab rigid specific Google that we do now. I could go in, I could surf around. That in of itself needs to be a defining part of the metaverse. The ability to go down rabbit holes. If you're of a similar age and maybe joined in the initial foray into the World Wide Web in the 90s, the diversity was exceptional. There was a lot of people building almost from an indie perspective, and let's bring that back. Because here's the thing, there's no one section of the metaverse that we can build individually. We all need to build together. And if we bring all those factors in, if we bring in virtual reality, if we bring in NFTs, that's the key. And for me, and I mentioned NFTs, for me, and in my opinion, and again, many others, they're a component of the metaverse that really unlock it. And I really want to focus on NFTs just quickly. Now, to give a little backstory, as I mentioned, I am a collector and I'm heavily invested into collecting, not just digital aspects, but also physical components as well. NFTs, in my opinion, are the components that unlock the idea. In terms of commerce or in terms of transactions, they're a necessity. And if you don't even have to invest in an NFT or buy an NFT, go and look at the rich community that is starting to form around NFTs. From the big, let's say, blue chips like Bored Ape through to the individual creator releases. It's a really, really tight, packed community that is exactly that, is a community base. Now imagine when they all come together. That's going to be huge. Add on to that crypto and blockchain. Now, I'm not the most technical person, but if you interact in any way, shape, size, or form with cryptocurrency or any sort of blockchain technology, to have that as an open ledger, literally, where people can own assets, where they can see that they own assets. It's very easy, certainly on the current iteration of the web right now that we live in, to falsify your claim. I could go out tomorrow and say, my wealth rivals that of Elon Musk and Warren Buffett combined. And of course, there's ways to check, but I could say that. And it would take a long, long time. And that's just an extreme example, I know. With blockchain technology, that's there. I can see who owns what, and I can transact with that person because I can see that they actually own it. That fundamental component of blockchain technology will help build that community up. It's a really, really powerful thing to actually have that openness where people are free to be themselves in a virtual world. And that's why I started and mentioned that when I was younger, I was quite an odd child. Again, to use the NFTs as an example, when you go into that community, any type of community, whether that's on Discord or Twitter or Reddit, they're very supportive. They're very building people up. And without that within the metaverse, that needs to be a component. So when we bring all this in, when we start to fill in those gaps of the map to the metaverse, then we can really get a solid understanding of what the metaverse is. But by then, always start with the end people in mind. Look at that. If you want to define, if you're in the XR space or you're keen to play and build in the metaverse, start people-centric. What do people need? What do they want? What's going to bring value to their life? Sure, people can go and spend thousands on a Bored Ape NFT. Sure, they can go and spend money on a VR headset and they can play Beat Saber. Sure, they can do all of these things. But what else do they need? Start with the people in mind, then work backwards. Then, and only then, can you start to bridge that gap. And as we start to color in that map, and as we start to add these components in, you then will really only define what the metaverse is. And that is a question that the whole tech industry is seemingly forgetting. So back to that journey, as I'm navigating through the map to the metaverse, and hopefully as you start to navigate through that map to the metaverse, as a little thought experiment, ask yourself, what do I need? What do I need the metaverse to be? Do I need it for my day job? Do I need it to combine my education and entertainment together in one? Do I need it for talking to friends and family? And again, as that thought experiment, ask yourself, what can I do specifically to bridge that digital divide? Until you do that, then there's going to be no metaverse. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much. I think now everyone is like thinking and questions probably come in. There's already one question from Mark, and I think I can show it. He asks that the Web 3.0 seems sound, but that you threw in the phrase must be blockchained, and he's asking, hey, why? And please justify. And I think you just actually mentioned a couple of sentences ago that it will help with the openness and the transparency and transactions. But maybe you can actually elaborate just a little bit more why you see that.
Sure. I mean, I think and it's a great question, Mark. So for me and others, Web3 strives for that, let's say, openness and transparency in terms of virtual ownership. And NFTs are a great example of that, because of course, I can go and find the most expensive NFT, right click, save as, and then paste it to my own Twitter profile. But I could also do that with the Mona Lisa, but people know that that's a fake. So Web3 strives for, let's say, that openness and communication within the community. That, to me, is what blockchain does as well. It has that transparency in it. For me, that's the fundamental thing. Does it have to be specifically blockchain based? Maybe not, and that's a slightly different question. But for the true my definition of the true metaverse and true Web3, it needs that openness, it needs that transparency within the community. Blockchain is a technology that also facilitates that.
And following up on that, I was wondering, you also said in the beginning, can my mom use it? Mm-hmm. And when I think about blockchain or NFTs, my mom has no idea about this stuff. Sure. And so that's already like, I try to explain it, but then trying to bridge that gap there and being able to understand what would their role or what would their interest be in the metaverse. I'm not sure. Like, how about your mom? Does she know about NFTs and so on? With that, like, how do you bridge it there?
it's a great question. That's the whole part of the digital divide. You know, it's a generational thing, but it's also a geographic thing as well. So here in Poland, I'm originally from the UK, but I reside in Poland. Technology adoption is slightly behind North America, as an example. But if we go to the other end of the extreme and let's look at a location like Ethiopia. Now, their computers know, mobile phones slightly more so, but still no solid internet connectivity, no solid access to information or technology or the hardware specifically. That's a big component of exactly that, is defining that map. Those questions need to be solved. And that's why I'm always a big believer in any endeavor in life is starting with people first. To Martin, to come back to your question specifically, does my mum know about NFTs? My mum can barely use a smartphone. And that's why I always give that example. Could my mum use this? And this is a key thing, is to make the hardware, yes, to make the technology more affordable, lighter, more accessible to everybody, but also much more simplistic. If you've ever tried to port a VR experience from an Oculus to a Pico or from an HTC to something, you know, I can't do that, and I own a technology company. Luckily, we've got very talented people that can do that. But if my mum, as an example, bless her, would look at that and wouldn't even know where to start. So for me to bridge that gap, it needs to be something as simple from a VR perspective, at least, of me picking up, and I didn't plan this, but I've got a prop here, as to me picking up my glasses and putting my glasses on. If I can do that and have that mixed reality or VR or even AR layered on, that's going to make my mum's life much easier, and probably mine, as she asked me 1,000,001 questions.
And I think the interesting part is that often people do not know yet what they want. Like, I don't think that people knew they wanted to have smartphones that make their life easier because they can look up things, they have a digital map and so on. But someone actually started with that and said like, hey, this is a great idea. So now thinking of like, hey, what would people really need? And I think there's a couple of use cases in the industry where we see, okay, it fits very well and people adopt it there. But I don't really know yet about the general public, let's say, everyone, like, hey, what would you take out of the metaverse? And you asked that question in your talk to actually the audience, that they need to think about that. What would they get out of it? And then I think also the question is like, how do you imagine it? Like, that's already the start. Like, what is it gonna be? And so I think that's kind of something that's super interesting, because we can't really have an answer to that right away.
It is like I say, it is a thought experiment, at least one that we're running and here at Flint. But we're talking to a lot of people and a lot of companies as well. But to your point, you're absolutely right. Is, as I mentioned, what people are building right now is that multiverse of metaverses. So they're those walled gardens, they're those kind of enclaves that only certain people have access to, whether that's through an NFT or whatever that is. But they're building those walled gardens of metaverses. For me, in my definition of the metaverse, and that's why I gave that computer game map analogy, I should be able to walk from one to the other, very, very simply, very, very straightforward. we're, in my opinion, we're a good decade away from that happening. We are a good decade away from that happening. And this is the key thing. The metaverse has been talked about since Snow Crash, and there's a lot of, which is a great book. If you've not read it, please go and invest in that as a book. But there's a lot of talk. I think what's happening now is the hardware's catching up, and the hardware is where it needs to be. The software's been, I would suggest, above and beyond where it was and still is. And one thing that the pandemic has done globally has, of course, accelerated this and accelerated the adoption from a corporate and enterprise level. We see it day in, day out. But again, in the industry bubble, let's say, and it's an industry I've been in for a long time, and it's an industry I absolutely love. I love the technology. It's one of the most collaborative, I think, industries I've ever been in. But look at what the people need, and that's the question that not enough people are, I don't think, asking. And it's one thing that I've been guilty of is, okay, so let's build it and then they will come. But actually, let's ask them and then help those people building it as well.
And one thing in terms of exploration, when you mentioned that in the web we actually served the web, I think where I encountered this already a little bit in a space, of course, it's still in one platform, one walled garden, but where you have multiple worlds is in alt space, where I go into a world and then maybe there's someone, maybe not, but someone built it and I can look around and move around. And then if I'm bored, I can go into a different place and then figure out, oh, how is that going to work? And even though it's still like, oh yeah, you have to go out and then go in, but it still already starts with a bit like, hey, you explore again. But do you have like an idea of how we would move from one world to the other? Is that something like you think about it and then you move there, or teleport, or do you have like a vision for that?
It's a great question, and I'm going to say the most frustrating yes, but also no. So in VR, for those that use VR, you can teleport between kind of stages, between sections. For me, that's one component, but again, it's that I think we all need to be asking better questions. Is how do the people navigate through that? Now, I've been a user of VR for a long, long time, so I'm very comfortable in navigating in virtual reality. But again, to use my mum as an example, she wouldn't be able to comfortably. Of course, it's a simple process and it's very easy to learn, but there is that learning curve. But it depends what corner of the metaverse that we're in. It really depends what function that is, whether that's a game, whether that's a mobile game, whether that's a conventional, let's say, Steam game or console game. To me, that navigation is as simple, again, as layering on that map over the metaverse and being able to literally on a D-pad on a controller scroll or walk through. But when it comes to VR, my vision of that web space in VR is exactly that, is you would navigate it without leaving the comfort of your chair or your home. You would navigate it through teleporting. So it's that combination. And I think genuinely, I'm sure, I don't know 100%, but I'm sure there's a lot of big hardware companies, chip manufacturers, all thinking this same thing. And I would almost guarantee, without knowing fully, that they're working on hardware that gives that accessibility. But again, when it comes to that digital divide, so you can navigate around, you can walk around in VR. Well, what about accessibility? What if someone's paralyzed? So then how do you navigate it? So it's a really interesting topic, and it's a great question, and definitely one that we're thinking about. But there is no, at least not yet, there is no right answer. If there was, I'd probably be talking to you from my yacht somewhere in the Caribbean.
And I guess there's multiple ways, like how we move in the real world there's different ways of how we can do that.
Exactly.
And that's going to be in these metaverses as well. Let me ask you, because you brought the question to the audience, and I'll just bring it back to you because they haven't answered it yet. Where would you see the metaverse in your day job? Like, are you using it already, or is there a part where you, like, if you look about the same question that you ask, if you look for yourself, where would it be super beneficial for you?
So it's a really good question. So as I said, I think for me, the metaverse is here already. It's just hidden in plain sight. So for example, we do some meetings in VR. This is that component of the multiverse of metaverses. But I sort of live and breathe the technology on a daily basis. So we do a lot of meetings in VR. We do use augmented reality for various demonstrations, so on and so forth. For me, I think and again, that within that 10 years time span, where the metaverse, again, in my definition, ought to be, it's going to make business travel a completely different thing. I don't know whereabouts in the world you're based, Martin, but I'm here in Poland, and I think and again, maybe it's that almost too optimistic vision, but for me, in a decade or more's time, it should be almost like we're sat in the same room. So time and distance starts to become less of a factor. And I think one thing that, and again, maybe it's too optimistic, but that I'd love to see right now is within the current iteration of the web, within everything that goes on in that, we do live in a very connected yet disconnected world. There's a lot of friction, let's say, I think, in the world right now. And I think the metaverse, with its openness and that community, should start to, water that down and get rid of it completely. Of course, human nature is human nature. There's always going to be wars. There's always going to be everything else. But in terms of that, it's gonna shrink those issues down.
I'll bring in a comment from Mel, who says he sees an endless elevator between worlds and spaces, but we need a ubiquitous addressing system that is user-friendly for everyone. So
100%, Mel, and that's. But Martin, to your point, look at how we navigate the physical world. Whether that's walking, riding a bike, bus, tram, car, plane, train, boat, yacht, whatever. There's going to be all of these. I believe there's going to be all of these different components. So for someone that can't drive in the physical world, they get a bus. Maybe for someone that can't teleport in VR because they don't have access to a VR headset, there could be that kind of endless elevator, which now I say it out loud, Mal, and I don't mean this in a bad way. That endless elevator surely has to end somewhere, unless it just goes on, infinity.
And maybe if there's maybe as a last question
Sure.
or a last topic, how do you see that individuals actually build or participate in that building the metaverse? Like, how do you see the, let's say, democratization of creating spaces? Where do you see maybe problems or also interesting factors that come with that topic? Because as you said, we need to build it together, but then there we have also, I think, quite a gap in terms of capabilities. So we have someone who needs to be capable of creating a 3D model or putting that into a space, or what are your concerns or ideas on bridging that gap between people that actually want to participate, but then also want to create maybe in that?
It's a really good question and really good point. I think the beauty of it is now it's already happening, and I know a lot of people say that we currently live in let's say a gig and creator economy, from Uber through to Fiverr as one example. If you look at what's happening in the space with NFTs as one example, and specifically what I would term metaverse games, as a prime example, the sandbox. For those that don't know, the sandbox is what I would consider a very early stage metaverse. Again, it's a walled garden. You can't go from the sandbox through to Red Dead as just one example, but it allows you to buy virtual land. You can buy items in there. But what it does do is it opens up the power to the people, I think, and gives us that true creator economy. As individuals, what we can do right now, and I implore everybody that hasn't, this is by no means financial advice, so please don't take it as such, but I implore everyone to go out and look at NFTs and look at meta games or metaverse games like the sandbox, like there's the Wolf and Sheep game, which is another great game where you can stake items that you own and earn. It's a play to earn metaverse game. I implore everyone to go out and do, of course, their own research. But I think one thing that we all forget is this is so early. Even though this has been talked about and worked upon for 10 or so years, the analogy I always give here, Martin, is the whole industry, whether that's the XR industry or whether that's the crypto industry. What we've been doing so far is just the warm up for the race. We've been stretching, we've been doing the warm up and maybe a couple of light laps, and we've got to the starting line, and really the pistol's just gone off, and we're all starting to run, and it is a marathon. To be honest, a lot of metaverse companies that are here now won't be around, but what will be around is the unicorns that kind of rise for them. But that can, again, only, at least in my opinion, only happen when mass adoption happens. But from an individual, people-centric basis, I would say, and I'm only 40, but I've been in the tech space, as I mentioned, for a long, long time. Right here, right now, is the most exciting time, I believe, for people, because it takes the power away from big tech companies. It does give it back to the people. It's the most exciting time since crypto, since the advent of kind of XR as we know and love it now. The whole metaverse space, specifically for individuals to earn, to be involved with, to interact with, engage and play in and build in, that is freely available right now.
Cool. Thanks so much for your insight on mapping the metaverse, or going the map and finding the way there. And I'll probably will talk next year and see how far we have progressed since then, right?
I'll look forward to, yeah. I think things are going to shift massively and accelerate super fast from here.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.